The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with John. John's going to tell us where and when he was born. He's going to describe what it was like where he grew up, the schools he went to, and the education that he received. So, John, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Grand. So, let's get cracking. Where and when were you born?
I was born in the city of New York, one of the boroughs of New York, the Bronx, in 1956. My parents were both immigrants. One was from Argentina, and the other was from the former Yugoslavia, now Slovenia.
Right. Now, the Latin American I get because it's the Sharks and the Jets, but the former Yugoslavia, how does that drop into the Bronx?
There was actually a pretty good contingent of refugees from the former Yugoslavia that did emigrate, not just to New York City, but also north of the Bronx. The Bronx was, a bedroom community of the city. Still is probably.
Yeah.
So we had a little enclave of Slovenians, Italians, Jews, Irish for sure, in the Bronx.
So it's quite a mixed community. Was it a rough neighborhood? I mean,
No.
you hear about the Bronx being, a real tough area of New York, and you've got the Jets and the Sharks fighting over Maria and that sort of thing. But that's kind of how I see and sort of dance competitions going on in the local neighborhood.
When I lived there, it was not a rough neighborhood. As the 70s progressed and into the 80s and into the 90s, it did become a very rough neighborhood, and quite poor. But at the time I was there, it was mostly people who had lived there for 20, 30 years, and also a wave of new immigrants who populated that. And then, as with most neighborhoods, things are very transient here in the United States and in New York. As people start to acquire education, wealth, they move out of these neighborhoods into other neighborhoods. So it was a great place to grow up. A lot of people, because they're mostly apartment buildings, we spent a lot of time on the street with neighbors, children playing on the street. So we sort of knew who our neighbors were.
Yeah. So that's quite a community of growing up then.
Yeah. We, as I said, my father was in the restaurant business. My mother was a homemaker. And as they acquired more wealth, we ended up, they bought a house in another borough of New York, Queens, which was a lot more suburban. Still in the boundaries of New York City. And so we sort of moved away from there into much more of a sort of a typical suburban living rather than, streets,
Yeah. So you lost that sort of kind of community spirit then, going to that sort of suburban type area.
Well, yes and no. It was a different community spirit, mostly centered around the school and the church. The suburban the suburban layout of where we lived in Queens was the houses were all post-war built, basically postage stamps of property. So you knew who your neighbors were. It wasn't so wide out. And of course, again, the community developed around the school and the church. So it was a different neighborhood, but we did know each other.
Okay. So when did you start going to school? Was that in the Bronx before you moved out to the Queens? Or
Yes. Yeah. I started I started at a public school for kindergarten in the Bronx, and then I went for 3 years to a Catholic school in the Bronx, and then we moved. My parents were Roman Catholic. My family has been traditional Roman Catholic.
Get the old spectacles, testicles, wallet, and watch caper. You go and do that every Sunday.
No, I religion is not a big part of me right now. So
the after kindergarten, you went to a Catholic school. Was that run by monks or nuns or priests?
It was run. It was run by an order, the Sisters of Charity, who were German, actually. And interestingly, I remember them standing in the hallway, during changing times of classes, yelling at us in German. Mach schnell. That's my first time I ever heard German. But they were, there are stories about Catholic schools being rough and tough, and the nuns being. I never saw that. I mean, the nuns that I was around were gentle, were great educators, were caring. And then when we moved to Queens, there was again another Catholic school, and that was run by the Dominicans. And there, that was just at the time of the Second Vatican Council, when they changed the Roman Catholic service from all Latin to the vernacular of the country. So it was kind of a heady time, because things were changing rapidly. The nuns came out from these large robes, where you could barely see their faces, and now all of a sudden you could see that, that they were people like us, But they were all young, and they were very, very enthusiastic and intelligent, and it was a great education.
So, what sort of grade did that take you to?
To the 8th grade here in the States, which is the end of elementary school, and at that point, I was ready for high school.
Yeah. So in elementary school, then, what was your favourite subject?
Social studies, history, and it. You probably would have said music. Music was important, but my passion at that time was especially politics. It was the 60s, and there were lots of discussions about either the war in Vietnam or the political situation in the United States. We lived through the Kennedy assassinations, Martin Luther King's assassination. And so I was fascinated by history and fascinated by political commentary. Actually wanted to be a lawyer. That didn't work out too well.
We'll come on to that in a bit. So the history that you'd learn, because I guess history is different in every country.
Yes.
In the UK, we an awful lot of the history is recent history, looking at the First, Second World Wars, looking at sort of more ancient history, the ancient Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians, and then we're looking at sort of our local history, where we grew up. Is that similar to what you do in America, or is it sort of mainly sort of American history, which is very recent history that you look at, or do you look at wider world history?
It's changed. It changes here. And, actually having been an educator, I could see how the change also happened as I was teaching. My background, it was primarily American history. And however, most based history courses also include Rome, Greece, certainly Holy Roman Empire, the British Empire, Elizabethan times, and so But in some cases, it was heavily based on sort of the traditional curriculum, Civil War, American Revolution. There was a certain movement when I was going to school that the state of New York required that we learn certain things. I guess it was more civic-minded about New York State, specifically the various indigenous Indian tribes here, the constitution of the state, things like that. So that was kind of useful, but I would say it wasn't as extensive a curriculum in histories of other countries like what you might find now in classrooms.
Yeah. So when did you start getting into music?
Oh my.
And what sort of music were you into?
Well, I started playing the piano at 4 while we were living in the Bronx. And I was fascinated by the instrument and pretty much continued playing it for the rest of my life as it is now. The music I was interested in was varied. Again, having been through the early 60s with the so-called British invasion, you know, we were all Beatles fans. And I remember watching him.
Apologize for that.
You know, I still listen to those songs and it brings me back. But I remember watching them on Ed Sullivan and the whole mania that happened here in the United States when they arrived. I wouldn't say at that time I was a rocker. But as I progressed through school, I was very interested in classical music, and I was very interested in opera and musical theater. And my parents took us to New York to see opera, musical theater, and theater itself, concerts. And so I just sort of ate up everything that I was put in front of me. I later learned to play the trumpet in school. Play the organ in church, but I wouldn't say that I was on a track to have music as part of my life at that time. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. I would learn arias I've heard, on records, and try to find the music to play Broadway shows and the like.
Talking of Broadway, did your parents take you there very often? Were you able to go to Broadway and see shows up there? Or
oh yeah, and it was much more reasonable in terms of ticket prices. But we did. We saw a fair amount. When we lived in Queens, we weren't that far from Midtown Manhattan and Broadway. So yeah, I saw Company. I saw Fiddler on the Roof. I can't even remember all of them. And also saw Broadway productions in other venues too, with professional actors. And so that really inspired me. I remember the first time I saw South Pacific. I pestered my parents to buy me a booklet so that I could play all the songs. And I ended up finding scripts someplace. At that time, when I was 10, I could probably recite to you the entire play by memory. I certainly knew all the songs. I could sing them all. But yeah, they did take advantage of that. And as I said, Broadway was again, a very different experience than it is now.
So can you remember either the first play you went to see or the first Broadway show? And if you can't, what was your favorite?
First play I saw. I'm not sure. One that sticks out in my mind was Morning Becomes Electra with Jason Robards and Colleen Dewhurst. And my I remember because my father's brother was a highly intelligent, cultured man, and my father worked nights. He sometimes would take us with my mother into the city, and he basically told us the entire synopsis of the play on the ride into the city. And we were sitting so close to the actors that it was just fascinating. My favorite Broadway, I always loved the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, Oklahoma, South Pacific, Carousel. I ended up seeing them much later, older. But I remember we used to also go to this amazing venue in New York. It still exists. In Central Park in the summer, they have Shakespeare in a park. Going to see Two Gentlemen of Verona there. And it was sort of a happening, it was Joseph Papp was running that theater. Some of those shows ended up going on to Broadway.
Yeah.
But those were very, I developed a love for Shakespeare.
What was it, contemporary, or was it set in the times of Verona, the Two Gents of Verona?
It was quasi-contemporary, and I think it was a musical, actually, or not. I don't know. Sometimes they would reset the time, but I remember this particular production, it was not reset, but I don't know if you've ever seen photos of that theater. It's called the Delacorte Theater, and it basically is an outdoor theater. And so very often they sort of use the setting of Central Park and behind as part. I remember seeing either Richard III. No, I do remember seeing a drama there where they actually use the backdrop as part of the set. But it was a great way to be exposed to Shakespeare.
Yeah. Well, my education was a bit limited, so I didn't get exposed to Shakespeare until just a few years ago, when I managed to get tickets to go to the Old Vic to see As You Like It, done contemporary.
Did you like it? Did you like it?
I couldn't understand a word of it. So they might have been speaking something totally different, but I couldn't understand the old English that they were talking. It just went way above my head. And I think because it was in a contemporary rather than sort of as it would have been, it probably just made it that much more difficult to understand. But
interesting. I saw As You Like It at the RSC in Stratford in the 90s. And I was I can't say that I am totally versed in the Shakespearean language, but I was just overwhelmed by the power of these actors there, speaking without microphones. You'd be sat in the back in the cheap seats and you could hear every word.
Yeah, it's a definite art.
Yes, definitely.
To be sure. So what was your least favorite that you saw back in those days? What didn't you enjoy?
I probably didn't enjoy Company. I didn't understand it. And again, it would have been hard to understand. I was 10, 11, and the theme is very adult. And I didn't understand Sondheim at the time. It wasn't exactly what I was used to, where you could hum a tune when you come out. I've since learned to love it, and played many of those songs. Actually played a review of Sondheim, which included songs from Company. But I just didn't understand it. I later had seen other Sondheim shows, Sunday in the Park with George and Into the Woods, and did some Sondheim myself. But that one was a little tough for me. But I didn't. I wasn't educated enough yet at the time.
Fair enough. So, moving off from your elementary school in Queens, moving into high school, how did you get on there?
Well, I went back to the Bronx. There was a high school. It's called a preparatory school associated with Fordham University in the Bronx, which is quite a very, very good university, Jesuit school. And our neighbor in Queens had gone into a program there called the 3-3 program, where you did high school in 3 years, you did college in 3 years, and then the idea being is that you went straight into Fordham Law School, which was a very highly rated school. That's what I wanted to do. So I applied. I got into Fordham Prep. I went there for 3 years, and then realized I really didn't want to go to law school, or I didn't want to go to Fordham University. But it was a very academic, competitive school. We were required to take Latin and Greek and humanities and classics. I'm not sure, in retrospect, it was probably the perfect school for me, having been coming out of it as an artist. But I'm grateful for the education I got there, and there was some amazing teachers and intellects in the school that you wouldn't normally find in your run-of-the-mill American high school. I made lasting friendships there, and met probably one of my influences in music, the choral director there. So in that sense, at the beginning of my time there, it was basically a school within the university. And of course, it was 1970. There were still protests on the Vietnam War and a lot of radicalism on campuses. So that was kind of exciting to say. But as I said, I did high school in 3 years. Normally here in the States, you do high school in 4 years. And I was done. It was time to move on.
Did you get caught up in any of those demonstrations and stuff at the time, or
no?
Did you just sort of go on with what you had to get on with? I guess it was quite a difficult studying all of the classics and Greek and Latin.
Yes, and I wasn't very good at it. Latin, yes, but Greek. I wasn't a terrific student. I probably should rephrase that. I was motivated by things that I liked, and the things that I didn't like, I could care less about. And that didn't sit very well at that school.
I think that goes for pretty much most people. Most people will knock it down and get on with something that they enjoy, and if they're not enjoying it, then they'll tend to mug it off a bit.
Yes.
So I don't think you're alone on that one.
No, but I wasn't the model student there. I had to struggle to get it all done. But I think, again, looking back, struggle is a good thing. I think when things are too easy for yourself, it's good to struggle. Yeah,
absolutely. Makes you a better person, I think. I mean, hardship does bring out the best in people, I think.
Yeah. If things are too easy, I think then when they're not easy or when they are difficult, you can at least, there's a reservoir that you can draw from.
Yeah. So the end of that 3 years, you worked out that law wasn't you.
No.
What did you work out?
I worked out that I had to first be involved with music, that I needed to be involved with music, that there was something that I sort of, I overlooked how important it was to me. And the other piece I learned, and I learned this because there was a program at Fordham where you had to do community service for a semester. And there were only two choices. One of them was work in a soup kitchen in a sort of a poor neighborhood. And the second choice was to go a few blocks from the school where there was a very heavy Italian immigrant population and give time teaching these students who didn't speak English, but they needed to pass a test for schools, high school. So I went there once a week, and I was probably awful at it, but I was smitten with education. You know, the way they looked at me when I walked into that room, like I was a lifeline for them. And so the other thing that I learned was that I needed to be a teacher. And so I applied to and was accepted to this 4-year liberal arts school in Westchester County called Manhattanville College. It originally had been a school of the Sacred Heart, but they renounced their ties to religion so that they could get state funding. But it was very highly regarded as a music education school. And that's where I landed for 4 years, not as a lawyer.
So, on the musical side, then, you're obviously by this stage fairly proficient in the old Joanna, playing the piano, and you say you picked up the trumpet as well.
Yes.
During high school. Were they the only two instruments that you were playing at the time, or what else was involved with learning to become a music teacher, I guess?
Okay. I did play the tuba in high school for a year, which is similar to the trumpet, just it's bigger.
A lot bigger.
Yes. I did also learn to play the organ, and did have a church job even in high school. And sang in choirs, sang in a lot of choirs. And so that was basically my background when I entered college. There, training music teachers involves, because the way the certification works in New York State is that they're certified from kindergarten to 12th grade, but there's no delineation on whether you're an instrumental teacher or a vocal teacher. You had to learn it all. So I had to take courses in stringed instruments. I had to take courses in the wind instruments and percussion instruments. Needless to say, I don't think anybody would pay the price of admission to hear me play the violin. They probably run in the other direction. But at least I knew how the thing functioned and some of the key words, and it actually, years later it helped me. But just to know enough to be able to do all of these things, plus of course teach classes and be a chorus master.
Yeah, I mean, were you one of these teachers that picked on a poor kid that you knew that his parents were bad, so you sent him home with a violin just to torment them, or were you a little bit more friendlier than that when it comes to the violin?
Yeah, I never taught the violin. I did teach it once in school. My experience as a teacher had always been of empathy. There are some people that came into my sphere who had aspirations to go farther in the instrument, but the vast majority were there because they love music, and so I wasn't one to, I didn't want to jeopardize that. It was more important for me that after they left my tutelage, that they continued to love music forever. whatever that meant.
Yeah.
And so, no, I was not. No, I was strict in rehearsals for sure. You don't want to be a pushover. But the bottom line for me always was, I'm not there to train musicians. I'm there to instill and keep a love of music for a lifetime.
Yeah. So you're obviously teaching stuff like how to read music, how to read sheet music,
Yes.
how to apply it to the different instruments, and obviously help run a school band or orchestra, or choir.
Yes.
So
I did it all.
that's a 4-year college course to be able to teach all of that.
Yeah. And then there's also, there's bits of that because of what the requirement is for teachers to be certified, that you had to take some psychology courses. I took languages because I dealt with a lot of singers, and I'd have to play, things in other languages, either Italian or French or German. And so I studied French. I already knew Spanish and Italian from my household growing up. But I was also, I had to be able to coach in German as well. So the degree program for a teacher is extensive. A music teacher is extensive. And then there's the psychology classes too, because, and in addition to, you still have to take the theory and the history, like any other music major would. And you have to have proficiency on your own instrument, which I continued studying piano at a high level, and learning how to conduct, learning how to,
Yeah, I've always found it interesting, conductors. I mean, they stand at the front there, and they're like the centerpiece of a whole orchestra, and from a layman, they're just standing here waving their hands about. But I understand it's a lot more complex than that. They're having to sort of not only read one part of the music, they're having to read all the parts of the music to know when the percussion comes in, or when the wind comes in, or whether the strings come in, and when the brass comes in. So they're having to piece all that together in their mind whilst waving their arms about and pointing at the right bits and getting the right tempo. So I imagine that's a whole sort of skill in itself, I guess.
It's a life skill. I'm still working on it. It starts, from looking at some dots on a piece of paper and trying to make life out of it. Much of the skill is also dealing with people. In the past, conductors were seen as, autocratic monsters almost. That doesn't work anymore. It's the idea of trying to coax, collaborate, maybe it's a better word, with the people in front of you, so that it's not just coming from me. It has to come from them, and we have to sort of agree on all of it. Yeah. And so the arm waving, there are some conductors who, in my opinion, tend to put more of a show. Most players in front of them see that as fake. But there is a communication that goes on to telegraph, as you say, tempi, who comes in where, and not only who comes in where, but how they should come in. And sometimes that's not done with the hands; it's done with the eyes and the face. But you're right, to get all of that together at that moment, and then to hear it and process it, and then transmit it it's a life struggle for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some experience of working with bands. I mean, military bands. My last job in the army, I was a welfare officer, and some of the people that we looked after were the 5 foot guards bands of the household division. So we had the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, and Welsh Guards bands that we looked after. So did quite a lot of work with those guys, and to see their working day, how they went around business, because they're all professional musicians. Then you've got the band sergeant major and the band master, to see how they go out, and then being on parade with them, listening to how they're conducting themselves, particularly when they're doing a Queen's Guard, doing a change in the guard at Buckingham Palace, and seeing them march out and marching out, keeping in step. It's quite a feat. And when they're laying on concerts and stuff like that, I had fantastic opportunities to go and see people that I know on a daily basis performing and doing their job, which is a real treat.
It's such a great tradition of the British military bands. I mean, some of the music is I've always loved listening to British military bands, and playing Holst and Vaughan Williams, and that great tradition. I did see the changing of the guard once with the band in London, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that happens on a daily basis in London, during the summer months. During the winter, it's generally every other day, and during the pandemic and all that, I mean, it went slightly petong. They didn't do any of it at all, although they carried on doing the guards, and it was just dry mounts or wet mounts, so they just drive over, change the guard, and then carry on as normal. So from that point of view, they had a lot of time off, to do nothing really other than practice at home, which was a real shame.
I'm sure they appreciated the time off to practice.
Well, yeah, I mean, they did have virtual rehearsals as well, so they're doing rehearsals online, and a few of the guys actually put a piece together online and pieced it all together to put out on YouTube. So yeah, so it had its challenges, but
yes.
These guys professionals, and that's what they do for a living, as well as being soldiers.
Of course. Yeah.
So bring us on then. Let's. So you graduated university after 4 years, got your teaching qualification. What was your first job as a teacher?
It wasn't what you might think. I did not go into a formal school. Because I did high school in 3 years, and because of the way the system and education here is in the States, I was very young when I graduated from college. I was 20 years old. And so I wanted to play freelance. So my first real teaching job was teaching in a community music school, piano. And I actually did that for a number of years. It allowed me fairly decent income, and the ability to go and play concerts and, kind of jump around from here to there without having to have a full-time 5-day a week. Although I was teaching a lot of piano students at the time, but I wasn't ready to, to go into that school track, forever and ever and ever. And I guess after doing that for 2 or 3 years, I thought, well, I probably need graduate school. So I decided that I auditioned for graduate programs. I ended up going and being accepted into the Manhattan School of Music in Manhattan as a piano major, while maintaining some of these little odds and end teaching things to support myself. I finished that in 2.5 years. and realized that I needed a break from the piano thing. So I took a job at a private school in Manhattan, the city of New York. At the time, it was called the Anglo-American School. And it was pretty much run by Brits. A lot of teachers were from overseas on 2 or 3 year contracts. There were a few of us who were American, but most of the faculty was from overseas, and it was an amazing experience. I still look back fondly on that, even though the money was awful. I couldn't stay there that long. And the money was really awful, but it really formed my taste in music, my idea about teaching. My colleagues were just brilliant people. They graduated from Oxford and Cambridge, and you know, the discussions we would have, and you know, the collaboration we would have. I was the only music teacher. But I got very close to the drama teacher, who was from the UK, and a variety of some of the other social studies teachers who were also all from the UK. So that's where I sort of ended up. Got married during that time, and then at that point realized that, you know, got to pay some bills. So I started in the public school system in New York in 1985, September 85.
And how long did you carry that on for?
Oh, I would say 38 years, 39 years.
That's old.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
so 38 years teaching kids. At what age level?
I started at what they call middle school age here, which is grades 6, 7, and 8. And then I was transferred to the high school, which is grades 9 through 12, and ended doing that age group for the rest of my time. And 2 schools. I mean, the first one that I started in 85, I was there for 15 years. And then the other school, I was there for, I guess, 18 years. And then I retired.
So here's a bit of a question. Out of all the kids that came through, how many went on to making a professional living out of music that you'd been teaching? Do you have any famous kids that came through that went on to be famous musicians?
Well, I have 3 that were on Broadway. One was in the musical Once. Funny story. I actually 2 others were in a revival of the musical Cats, and I went to see it, not realizing that I knew one of them was in Cats, but I didn't realize that the other one was also. And so I'm sitting in the theater watching 2 former students on stage and Broadway, you know, which is quite nice.
Did you get back to see them backstage after the show, or?
Oh yeah. We actually, with one of them, I think we went out to. It was a matinee. We went out there for a drink. Yes, yeah. The first one, actually, I saw her in a few Broadway productions besides Cats, and she's now in the musical Chicago.
Oh, right.
Famous. I know a fair amount who still work as musicians. Some players, some string players. A lot of teachers, a lot of music teachers, because I also taught at a college for 15 years, and so. But as I said to the beginning of this, that's icing on the cake.
Yeah.
You know, the things that make me the happiest is when I see former students, specifically on Facebook. I don't know what you think of Facebook. I have my opinion sometimes of Facebook, but the beauty of Facebook as a teacher is that you can connect with former students.
Yeah.
And, when they start talking about going to their kids' school recitals, going to their, and they remember when they were in my class or in my chorus or in my orchestra, in some cases, I must say that means more to me than the ones who made it on Broadway or, play in a Philharmonic or et cetera, because there's many more of those than there were who ended up being professionals.
And I guess that's that for you is you've left that legacy for that generation that you taught, that's then passing on your support, your teaching to their younger generation. And I guess that is something really satisfying to know that what you've instilled in somebody, they are then taking it forward to future generations.
Yes. And even like it or not, especially music teachers and especially vocal music teachers, we're role models. We may not want to think we are, but we are. And
Absolutely.
So they study how you go about your business, which is why I always was very careful about what I said to students, or what I didn't say to students, because they actually they look for that. And so even it's funny, I've had this conversation with a former principal of mine the last few days about that, and the idea being that that they feel safe with you. They feel like they want to be like you. They feel like you're a person they want to connect with. That's important. That has always been important to me. That's probably the biggest thrill I had. And that's why I went into teaching. I saw those pair of eyes, that were looking at me in Italian, in this Italian section of the Bronx, looking for help. So it was a good career. That.
So, what's been the highlight of your career, other than retiring?
I have to say, conducting my choirs at Carnegie Hall.
Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah. Conducting one of my choirs in Oxford. Those are when you're in a space that is storied, and you're conducting superior music, that's a highlight. For my own self, I've been lucky to have played for lots of terrific people. I've been lucky to conduct professionals. I have another one. Conducting a choir in Salzburg, in the room where Mozart played as a child.
Wow.
That's a highlight.
I guess that's got its own atmospheric and acoustics that make that special. And did you perform some of his work?
Yes, we did. We did his Ave Verum, and it was Mozart, Brahms, and Schubert. And we had to put together a little orchestra, little chamber orchestra with a choir. It was a festival I was doing in Austria. I was the choir master, and it was just really exciting to be in that. It just oozes of that time.
I got a little funny about Mozart. There's a scene in a film called the Wooden Horse, and it's in a hospital, and you got a couple of escaped prisoners talking about trying to get out, and a German doctor comes in, and just in the background is playing a bit of Mozart, and as he walks out the door, he says, Mozart, he's a good German. Well, and the reply comes back from for an Aussie. Yeah, he's dead.
Ouch. Yeah.
So that kind of sticks in the mind about Mozart.
Yeah. Well, he's a good Austrian, actually. He's actually Austrian, and he wrote his operas in Italian. You know, so he was a Renaissance man, and he is dead. Yeah.
Yeah, he's dead.
Yeah.
Brilliant film. Absolutely brilliant film. Anyway, bring us up to date. What are you doing with your retirement?
Well, I've been freelancing as a musician, more so before the pandemic. A lot of what I was doing was shut down. I did a lot of online things. So I was playing for some opera companies in the city. I was doing some conducting. When things started loosening up a little bit, we started doing outdoor stuff. I work with some singers here who come to the house. Things are as they're starting to recapture. I'm going to Romania in June to conduct an opera, and hope that some of the things that I was doing are going to come back. So I still play in churches, like a sub. I don't have a regular church job. I did that for 40 years, and I had enough of being away on holidays from my family. So I now pick and choose when I want to play. But I love playing the organ.
So as they say in the theatre, you don't have a seat.
No.
I had a chat with a guy called Ivan Bodley, who's a bass player, and he's played quite a lot on Broadway and stuff like that, and he's stood in for guys that have got the seat. And he reckons it takes about 20 years before you get one.
It's hard to break in. It's very hard to break in into a group like that. I'm lucky. I have a lot of friends who actually do play in Broadway pits, and it's usually by subbing a lot, and then they get to know you, and that's how it works. I'm at the point in my life that I'm not sure I want a seat. I kind of like the idea of bouncing around, and somebody calls me and says, "Can you do this?" If it fits with not only my schedule, but my family's schedule now, because my wife is now retired as well, then I'll consider it. And if it doesn't,
So you've got enough to keep a roof over your head and food on the table, you can pick and choose what you do.
Yes.
And that's what I love about retirement.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. I could say I'm doing this for a living, but I'm not making anything out of it. I'm only interested about hearing other people's stories and leaving that legacy for future generations, so they could look back at this time in history and have an understanding of what we were doing now.
That's fascinating. What was your?
That's what I'm doing it for.
What was your? Obviously you were in the military, but what was your career?
Military.
Yeah,
I did 44 years under the colours, man, boy, regular, and reserve.
Wow, good for you.
I did a lot of operational tours. I did 7 operational tours in psychological operations. So that involved understanding a target audience, looking at culture, looking at the way people are, what influences people, what attitude and behaviour that they've got that we want to change. So I've had an absolute ball doing my career.
So were you in the Army or the Royal Navy?
I was in the Army. I joined the British Army on the 5th of August 1974 as a junior soldier in the Royal Anglian Regiment, which is an infantry regiment. And I finished up still wearing a Royal Anglian cap badge, but I ended up working with the Guards. So the household division, which was great fun because I reminded them that I was a proper infantry soldier every day of the week. So I had a great time.
Good. When you were mentioning Portsmouth, I actually was in Portsmouth, and I think I actually maybe even heard. Isn't there a near the port? There's a gazebo where sometimes bands play. Or am I dreaming that?
Yeah, no, I think there's a bandstand down on Southsea that they've got a bandstand where occasionally on a summer's afternoon there'll be a band that plays. There's also the band of the Royal Marines that are based here on this side of the harbour at HMS Collingwood, which is the band of the Royal Marines. So they practice and put on concerts around the bazaars. So you could have heard them. Yeah,
it was the year after we got married. It was sort of quasi honeymoon. We rented a car and drove all over the south of England. Ended up staying in Portsmouth with at a B&B. Interesting, the proprietors. He was a retired soldier, a Polish soldier from the Second World War.
Oh, right.
And ran this B&B with his wife. Amazing sausage breakfasts. But I love Portsmouth. It was just a beautiful town.
We are steeped in history. I mean, we're say Portsmouth and Gosport. We are dripping with history,
right.
And it's a great place to live. And I love it down here.
Oh, hope to get back.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you, Tim.
Anyway, thanks, John. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been really interesting. It's understanding. I mean, a music teacher for donkey's years, and your experiences of conducting and all the rest of it's been brilliant.
Thank you. It's lovely talking with you.
And you.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.